What's up, Internet? This is Rambling Josh, and today I want to talk a little bit about a game called Sundered. Sundered is a game by a company called Thunder Lotus, who you may recognize as the creators of Jotun, which admittedly is not a game that I've played, but I know that there was a decent amount of buzz about it when it came out and such. They've both got kind of like super pretty hand-drawn graphics that animate surprisingly well. They've got like super big room-filling bosses and all this stuff, but Sundered is a game that kind of strikes to the heart of what I like in games. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what it does and how I think it makes some really clever little decisions that really kind of sells the kind of game that they were trying to make. So Sundered is basically a combination of Metroidvania and Roguelike elements, which is definitely not the first game to try and do this kind of thing, but I think it's definitely the most successful, at least insofar as the kind of things that I like in games. So the reason for this is, if you think about it, Metroidvania games tend to focus pretty heavily on exploration and atmosphere, and because of these things it tends to rely pretty heavily on having really high quality level design. Whereas roguelike elements tend to focus more on procedural generation and typically being very hard and potentially killing you a lot, and you have a structure that's based more around runs where it's assumed that you're going to die, kind of thing. And it's almost like a Dark Souls kind of idea. Like Dark Souls you could almost call a meshing of the two genres, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So right off the bat, the first thing that I think Sundered does really well is the way it went about randomization in its levels. So essentially what it does is that the entire world is laid out in preset ways, so that every time you play the game, all of the primary objectives, all the main points of interest are going to be located in exactly the same spaces. And what this does is that it means that you can have the same kind of, you can design out your level flow. You can say, oh, I want there to be a shortcut here, I want to have an ability here, I want to have a boss here, I want it to flow like this. And you can design all that out exactly the same way that you would, well, maybe not exactly, but I assume it's pretty much exactly the way that you would for a normal Metroidvania type game. Like I said, right down to the idea of having like shortcuts and all that. But what it does differently is that the connecting areas in between those points of interest are composed of large rooms that basically have like randomized like tunnels, so that the overall area that the room can take up is always the same, and the room is always like in this like the hallway or whatever you want to call it is always in the same place. But what that hallway looks like is a little bit different every time. And when I say every time, I mean every time you start a new game, every time you turn the game off, every time you die. Basically every time you go through that area is going to be a little bit different. And this is really nice because I find it strikes a really nice balance in between having, like, knowing where you're going and having that journey be interesting. Like, if you think about like a Dark Souls game where you're potentially dying a lot, then let's say you're like death cycling on a boss, you're making the exact same journey back to that boss every time, and it's not interesting once you've done it once or twice. In fact, it gets really frustrating, right? You're just running along the same pathway, potentially killing the same enemies, there's nothing new or interesting to find. Whereas with this randomization element that Sundered has, it's a little bit, still an element of finding your path. Because it's randomized, you're potentially going to find little caches of treasure along the way. And it all just kind of comes together to mean that your journey back is, I'm not going to say fun, but it's at least interesting. And because of the fact that there's like treasures and stuff that you can find, it also means that you're able to still progress a little bit while you're potentially death cycling on a boss, dying over and over and over again. And when I say you can progress, that might sound a little bit odd, because the industry for a few years now has been like obsessed with the Dark Souls style, you die, you lose all your souls, you have to regain them kind of thing. It seems like every game has this kind of thing in it now, especially if it's a game that's relatively difficult, where if you're dying, then essentially you're not able to reap the benefits of the like experience or whatever that you've accumulated until you actually do get past that challenge, or you run away. But Sundered made the decision that when you die, you don't lose your experience. You die, you go back to your base, you have all your experience, and you can spend it all there, and then you just go again. You're a little bit stronger than the last time. This game is set up with like a whole skill tree system, so you're pretty much always going to be able to spend experience on something, because all the upgrades are very kind of incremental, so that most of them are not especially powerful, but you're going to be able to buy them, and so you're basically going to be able to guarantee that you're going to be a little bit stronger every time that you go out. And this is really nice because even if those stat gains don't have a super huge impact on their own, it at least feels like you're making a little bit of progress still, even if you're not actually killing the boss or getting past whatever challenge is stumping you. You're still achieving something by trying and failing. And this is just kind of like the overall feel of the game that I really appreciate. That, like I said, it kind of moves away from that Dark Souls feeling of like death being this tragic thing. It's a trope that I'm pretty sick of personally. Maybe it's just because it doesn't really appeal to me as a gamer necessarily. Like, I think that kind of mechanic is good and it is effective at what it wants to do. It really communicates a certain amount of tension, and it creates these situations where you actually are legitimately afraid of dying, which is the feeling that those games are going for. Sundered just doesn't have that approach. It doesn't want that feeling, I guess, and I appreciate that. Because to me, if I'm not making observable progress on like my actual character sheet, like irregardless of my actual like player skill as a player, then I feel frustrated. And I just don't like it in most cases. I can play those kind of games, but like I need to do it like sparingly kind of thing. So the fact that Sundered has this kind of system where yes, you are going to die a lot, but you're always going to be making progress. You're always going to be challenged a little bit by having a little bit of randomization. It really appeals to me, because it kind of creates a scenario where you just get in this mindset of like, okay, I'm just going to go for a run, I'm going to see how far I get, see what I find, just kind of see what's out there, just get to explore, and when I die, I die. It's very low committal, and I think it really works. And a part of that is just down to the fact that I guess you could even say that the game itself is almost better enjoyed in smaller chunks, because there are times where, you know, I've gone super long without dying, and I've got like tons and tons and tons of experience, and there's a part of me that's like, okay, I just want to spend this now, and I'm almost like looking for a way to die. I mean, you can always just return to the base on your own, but like that almost feels like you're like giving in kind of thing. Like, why would you do that when you could just look for some absurd challenge that maybe you're going to be able to overcome? Probably you're not, but, you know, it's interesting to try and see. You know, maybe you find your way into a new area. Maybe you, like, accidentally sequence break into some place that you're not supposed to be at, and you get your ass handed to you, and that's just a part of the experience. You don't have the frustration of, like, oh, like, the randomization screwed me over, or, like, I found myself in, like, a really awkward situation, and everything was awful, and now I died and now I have to reset, or like now I've got to like find my way back to my body, and my body's in this awful place and everything is awful and I haven't made any progress at all. All that time was just a waste. There's none of that in this system. And like combine that with the fact that it's Metroidvania, and I love Metroidvania, and it's got a skill tree, and I love skill trees, and it's got all these like perks that are kind of interesting, and You can make these different interesting loadouts. And like, I don't want to sell this as though it's not a game with flaws, because it 100% does have flaws. But interestingly enough, I would say that a lot of them are not in any of these systems that, like, I think all of these systems do pretty much exactly what they're meant to do. They work out really well, and I would say that some of the problems in this game are down to almost the more authored content. Some of that stuff is just really frustrating and annoying, which is not where you would expect the pain points to be in a game with any amount of randomization at all, really. But yeah, just on the whole, I think it's a really solid game. It fits the niche of games that I enjoy very, very well. And I'm very glad to have put some time into it. Probably at some point in the future, I'll probably do more playthroughs of it on like a harder difficulty even. And that was just a few of the reasons why. Catch you later.